Hello and welcome all to the Middle Earth in Mercia podcast. This is episode 13, unlucky for some, our end of year review. Welcome back everyone and Happy New Year. This is the Middle Earth in Mercia podcast and as usual I am your host Sonny. This episode we are taking a step back to season 1 really, where we just sort of had episodes that were more of a chat. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, so as you can imagine I have a little bit to say, and I think we've got a few loose ends from last year on topics that I touched on that I wanted to finish off. I also wanted to look back on the year and just in general, just have a bit of back and forth chat with you. So first off, the podcast in review for the year. It's been a great year, really. I would have liked to have done a bit more recording here and there, but as I'm sure many of you can empathise, life certainly finds a way to throw a spanner in the works sometimes, and you just have to roll with it. So, it could have been more, but equally, it could have been a worse year and we could have had less. But on the absolute positives, the support you guys have shown and girls have shown for the podcast in terms of pure numbers, turning up for each episode, the growth we've had. I was really happy with what we did last year, and we've completely blown that out of the water in terms of listens, shares, followers. It's crazy. Everything's relative. I was expecting like 10, 20 people to be turning up for this. So the numbers that we see, for me, it's crazy. I'm sure there are other bigger podcasts out there that would be a bit disappointed, but it really helps motivate me. It really helps when I get the itch to come back and record, to motivate myself to do it. I really enjoy doing the recording. Perhaps the stuff that takes the wind out a little bit is the editing and the time associated with around it. But I've been getting better and better at that and trying to make these sessions more efficient. So, we'll have to see what 2024 has in store for us. But let's try and do more episodes. Let's try and do more tournaments. There's definitely going to be more content from myself and Ash. We've got a few sort of ideas in the pipework we'd like to do. We're still enjoying the game. We're still learning. In summary, thank you for the support. Especially thank you to those who have written us emails or who have replied to polls. And just a thunderous applause to any of those of you who have clicked on our Element Games referral link or done the buy me a coffee. I sort of just did those things as an afterthought, and the fact that people have taken it up. Thank you so much. We're putting all that kind of stuff into a pool, and maybe one day there's enough for a camera and we can do some stuff with that and see what happens. That's sort of looking back on the podcast for this year, a little bit of a look at the future, but I haven't made any hard plans yet. So let's talk about the game itself in terms of tournaments and the progress that's been made there. I've played Harad and Far Harad pretty much all year in pretty much every game I've played. I probably should have slipped a bit more variation in there, but we're use that in this year. And 6 tournaments in all, countless practice games, a lot of friendly games arranged. It's been good, really. Ash has obviously attended his first tournament. I don't think he made it to 6 tournaments. I think it was something like 4 for him. But a really good year. We had that really crazy high at the beginning of the year, getting a podium, getting in second place. And then the other highlight really being getting Best Army at one of the more recent tournaments. And I've really, in these tournament reviews, I've really been pushing myself and chasing to try and get that positive win-loss to sort of break into the top third consistently on the scoreboard, and majority of the time apart from that all of the time apart from that second, I've been mid-packing really. I've not been down at the bottom and I've not been up at the top, and that's sort of where we've round up really. And it can be you know, I think when you're goal orientated like myself, you can sometimes obsess about the numbers. And when I actually sit back and I think, if I had said to myself at the beginning of the year, you're going to attend 6 tournaments, you're going to enjoy all of them, and you're going to win best army at one of them, and you're going to come in podium position in second at another one, I would have definitely bit somebody's hand off, because I was hoping to maybe come 5th or 6th or something like that. Yeah, you have to aim high, but in my realistic expectations, that's kind of what I was hoping for. So you do need to take a step back, really, and be like, look, with the time I had, with the amount of tournaments I was able to go to, am I happy with this? And yes, I'm extremely happy with it. What a great year. I think if I had been able to double the figures I did, double the practice games I managed to find this year, double the amount of tournaments I've had, who knows where we could have wound up. I really do think that there is no replacement for playing games in this game in terms of experience. Like, you can take a lot from reading the rule book, knocking around imaginary lists with your mates and commenting on them. I do think that there is value in doing those things, but nothing adds value in terms of your player experience. I know it's probably blooming obvious, but I'm stating it anyway. Nothing adds player experience like playing games. And I think if we're going to take a step forward next year, or this year as I'm recording it, that's going to be probably my biggest aim, is to make sure I am playing more games and I want to play with more armies. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of experience as a player in my year of review. And yeah, thank you to all of my opponents. I met some of my friends have played some people that have been difficult, and I've met a few people that have had difficult games, but right now I honestly can't think of any where it's like, oh, that was really unpleasant or anything like that. So been, as we always say on the podcast, the vast majority of people out there are really nice, sporting people. I say I've been lucky, but I think that's probably actually par for the course. A great year in gaming, a great year in modelling, really, in terms of right at the beginning of the year, getting all my Mahud finished. I've probably coasted off my achievements in terms of painting from the beginning of the year for the rest of the year, really. I really crammed in a lot. I've got a nice full shelf of Mordor, Harad and Far Harad models, all fully painted, which is really nice to have a selection to choose from when people come around to play games. But yeah, all in, as I say, I wish I could have gone to more tournaments. I wish I could have played a few more games. But that time will come. There's been some hard times. Hopefully this year will be a bit easier. There are a few things on my slate at the beginning of this year, but hopefully a little bit easier in terms of time demands. But yeah, as I say, we'll see how she goes. Now, this is obviously an episode of reviews, and there's 2 more topics I think to look back on for 2023, and let's start with the more negative one, really, which I think inevitably, when you reach an end of year review, if you were creating some sort of content on your game you're a fan of, you would look back on the releases of that year and the support the game has received that year. And for us in MESBG, that is essentially 0. Yeah, what an awful year in terms of releases for MESBG. I think we've had some repackaging of some items and some cobbling together of some different units into pre-packaged arrangements to buy. We've obviously had the Get Off the Road miniature, which is just a display piece that you happen to be able to use the ring ray for. If you're into that kind of thing, if you enjoyed it, I'm glad you did. But I think for the average player of the game out there, there's been nothing. And I do think that the support this year, I mean, I see many people be like, look, this game was dead, it's been in a worse position, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. I get that. We still just about have a tab on the game, well, what now the Warhammer website. We just about have a tab on there. We get FAQs, which I think is a topic that we could do an entire episode on in of itself, so I'll try and keep it short. But the FAQs themselves are not always actually helpful to us as a community. I mean, just look at the Dragon Emperor. I know I've mentioned it a lot in a lot of episodes, and that's because it's absolutely outrageous that it hasn't received a points increase. It's very obvious to anybody that regularly plays the game that needs a points increase. And I'm sure that some of the games masters, or however you phrase it within Games Workshop, want to do that. And I'm also sure that somebody is standing there being like, no, we need to continue to sell this very large, expensive Forge World model. And I don't think that's going to change until they have a new Forge World model that they want to sell us. And they will nerf or increase the points cost on Dragon Emperor. And then we will have a new release out. And I think that's the way it's going to go. So I am being rather negative, but I think if you're being balanced on the support the game has received from Games Workshop this year, that is the only way to be. And people can speculate. We've got on one side, we've got people being like, oh, there's all these license issues. And then on the other side, you've got people being like, they don't care about the game, etc. And both of those are speculation. All we can go on is what we've seen and what has happened. And we've consistently seen this year, in my opinion, that it appears from their actions that the Middle-earth strategy battle game is bottom of the pile. We've had Legions Imperialis. We've had the launch of the Old World again, Fantasy Battle. We've had countless releases for Age of Sigmar. Near countless releases for Necromunda. God, that game is heavily supported. And, countless 40k releases. We've had huge amounts of releases for Horus Heresy. People are willing to make excuses near limitless for the company, and I don't really understand it, being as if Games Workshop can put out 2 commemorative plastic models every single year just for Christmas. How many of them are they actually selling? I can't believe it's that many. They're not always the best. They do that every single year in plastic, and we've had nothing this year. How can we support a game and try and encourage its growth if we have nothing new to purchase other than scenery, which is really expensive and almost completely redundant when you take into account how good 3D printers are these days, and the fact that the design work on scenery doesn't always take as much skill or effort as it does to model perhaps a miniature. So yeah, my year in review on the Games Workshop support is, I can't even give them a rating out of 10 because it's not existed. And when it has existed, it's been fairly, like with the Q&A, it's been fairly transparent that some of Games Workshop's more nefarious business practices are having an impact on it. So, I don't think there's a lot we can do as a community, but I do think facing the reality of we are very clearly at the bottom of the pack in terms of the priority. That is the reality, and I would be shocked if we, I would say this year has convinced me pretty much we will never see a plastic Warriors kit come out for anything. Call me back on this. Send me an email if you're listening to this in the future and say, Sonny, what adult you are. That's happened. I'd love to be wrong. But I don't care what you say about licenses and things like that. This year, if they thought they could make money out of it and they wanted to, something would have happened this year. I don't believe any other outcome. I have worked for many different companies and in the manufacturing sector, and I've consistently seen, no matter what hurdle there is, if a company thinks they can make money out of it, they will overcome it. And whatever is going on, whatever the blocker is, or whether it's just dissatisfaction amongst the management of Games Workshop, it doesn't seem to me like there's belief there. I mean, how many playing years do we actually get as a player? if we're in good health all of our lives and we play from childhood 70, and one of those years, an entire year, we haven't had any releases. That's a massive chunk of the time we're here to appreciate these things. That's not insignificant. And, I think if you have a different attitude, I fear you will be disappointed. But anyway, that is disappointing and has been a bit of a bummer of a topic. But I want to move on to a much more positive one, which is the Great British Hobbit League and the health of the game. Because unlike some people that may be poo-pooing the support the Games Workshop give the game, I in no way think that the game is in trouble. The game itself is alive and well. The Great British Hobbit League, absolutely congratulations to everybody that has held a tournament or been involved in the organisation, is on the board or whatever it is they call it. From everything I can see, they have had the most successful year in their entire history. There has been more tournaments, more players, more competition than there's ever been. And from my limited experience, I've only been going to GBHL events for a relatively short time, but it looks to me like it's getting better and better. The organisation, the standards are getting better and better. And yeah, just an absolute congratulations to everybody involved in that. You're working wonders in terms of keeping the game alive. And I totally agree with people online that if Games Workshop should do the worst and they should pull support, I would fear about the competition of community-led rules. I think you would inevitably get competition there of one person being like, no, I don't want it this way. No. And that would be a bit of a nightmare. But in terms of finding people that want to turn up and they want to play the game, I have no doubt it would continue to live on while an organisation like the GBHL exists. And then outside of the GBHL, my eyes have been opened more and more to the fact that there are a lot of tournaments going on outside the league. There are a lot of community groups outside of the league. They're everywhere. You can, maybe there are some areas of the country I'm ignorant to, but it looks like to me that you can go to most gaming clubs and you can probably find someone to play. So I think on the whole, that's really good for us. And I really do hope that Games Workshop at some point, somebody within there makes the business case and starts pointing out that this could be a growth area for them. There is good support for it. But the fact is, you're not going to make tons of money releasing 2 models that cost 25 quid in Forge World Resin. If you want everybody to turn up and you want to make some profit, release some new Minister of Warriors and some multi-part modern sculpted ones. Everybody's going to buy them. Everybody. I can't even imagine how much money that they could make. And I think that if they did that once as a tester with one of the mainline Warrior kits, made it modern, made it digital, made it multi-part, I can only, sort of like Hatchet do with the Imperium magazine. I've seen they're doing a new 40k one. They do a trial run. Do one kit, see how it goes. I'd love to see what sort of figures they pull. I mean, just look at how Warhammer The Old World has gone. They completely pulled the plug on that. And I understand that it sounds like there was a very valid business case for it at the time. There are reasons why the game was in decline, and part of them is Games Workshop support. But look, that being off the market for 8 years, and it's created an extreme hunger. I can't find a shop that isn't sold out of those starter kits. It's sold out absolutely everywhere. And I really think if they did something similar, if they did, look, here's a new box set, there's new warriors in it for Lord of the Rings, I think it would be a very, very similar result. Because although we have had this limited support, in terms of plastic warriors, it's been off the market for over a decade now. In terms of new models, I'd love to see what they do. But anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, just as I promised I would. What a great year for GBHL. congratulations to all of us that are enjoyers of the game. It is very much alive and well. I look forward to where it goes in the next few years. Maybe there'll be secondary organisations or regional ones. I think competition in these kind of things, competition for where people want to play, whether it's your local game club, whether it's your local store, or whether it's a GBHL event, I think that's only good for the community, is choice of options, because it forces people to up their game and continue to improve their standards. But it's very obvious to anybody with eyes that GBHL is leading the way in that, and yeah, congratulations to them for that topic of sort of Games Workshop support, the health of the game. It sort of leads me on to, and this isn't a year in review, but I guess it is a year in review in terms of I've had the models for a year. It's a review of 3D miniatures that I've wanted to do for a while, and I am by no means the the biggest purchaser of 3D miniatures, but I wanted to give a bit of feedback for the ones I have had experience of, because I have had it pointed out, and by a few listeners even, I was very critical about 3D miniatures, and I do still have my views on them, but my views have developed, and I'm sure Ash is out there somewhere shouting at his phone as he's listening to this, calling me a hypocrite. But I don't think it's hypocritical to develop your views and have the ability to change your opinion. I think, isn't it better if we're able to have different experiences and develop what we feel, rather than to just form an opinion and never change it regardless of new information and stimulus that comes our way? So yeah, at the beginning of last year, when I decided that I wanted to play Far Harad, I decided when I was making my list that I thought it would be fun to have the option of playing several half trolls, and I wanted to be able to play up to 8. I never have actually played that many, but I needed to get hold of 8 half trolls, and looking on the Games Workshop website, they only had 2 poses that I already owned. I had 4 of them, and I did not really want to buy another 2 packs to get the identical models. I do really like those sculpts, but yeah, there's only 2 of them, and I also wanted them to have single-handed weapons. So that really meant there's not really any easy way to convert that metal 2-handed model. So, it starts to absolutely spiral in terms of costs, and all I would wind up with is a gang of 8 guys that look identical, other than me varying up the paint scheme a bit. So that led me to go to Etsy, which is if you want to get 3D printed miniatures, you don't have your own 3D printer or access to it, or a friend or whatever, I think Etsy is a really good place to go. I don't know whether it is the most cost effective. You'd have to find somebody that is buying them all the time from other places to get an opinion on that. So, but for me, it seems like a good place to buy them from, because you've got several different sort of printing houses. I don't know whether they're just one-man operations that are nicely styled or not, but it appears that there's several small companies on there, and they are selling a host of miniatures from a load of different designers. And in one convenient place, you're able to see, look, here's all the different designers, and they've put them in helpful categories of, this is clearly meant to be this, and these are all the alternatives. And for me anyway, I was able to compare, look at scale and stuff, and look for the ones that suited my needs and were aesthetically pleasing to me and appeared to have good reviews. So the ones I wound up going for were from Forge Master Minis, and they were called the Far South Trollbloods, and these were designed by, let me just find it, and I'm really sorry if I'm butchering this pronunciation, but Kurz Luck Miniatures, and I will put a link to these models in the description, so feel free to head over there and have a look. Really great, really. You get 3 models for £12 or $11.99. You get 3 legs, 3 torsos, 3 heads, 2 pairs of arms with 2-handed weapons, 2 pairs of arms with 1-handed weapons, and yeah, so some modularity to them there. Cool. Imagine if we had that across the whole line of Middle-earth miniatures. So some modularity there. They are a bit bigger in scale, but they fit on the original base. It's not been too much of a problem. And with Forge Master as well, I think if you sit with the item in your basket for a while, you can actually wind up getting a 10% discount code, so you can save yourself a little over £1 there, and that's including delivery unless you want it sort of expedited. But yeah, so those were the ones I ordered. I wound up ordering one set and then ordered 2 more to follow on. And yeah, let's start from the beginning, really, how I found them. There was some cleanup. I don't really know where these people are getting their models from, that they say they just arrive and I glue them together and there's no prep whatsoever. There's prep involved. There's bits to clean off. There's a bit of filing here and there. I really don't know the safety standards on like the material safety data sheet for the specific resin that they're using, but the reason you should take precautions with it is it tends to form a much finer dust or particulate than your traditional plastic models, so that's why you might want to make use of a respirator or something like that in a well ventilated area. I'm sure is the ideal, and make sure you clean up afterwards. As I say, I don't know the standard of resin they use, so I would err on the side of caution. I certainly do with all resin miniatures. You don't really want that stuff in your lungs. You don't want anything in your lungs. But I know that resin dust can be particularly irritable. So anyway, it did have that extra barrier to entry in terms of the prep work. So that was one thing I had to do. Other than the fact I had to wear a mask and I had to make sure I specifically hoovered up that area afterwards, was it any more work than a plastic model? No. So not really a negative there. Resin is harder to work with. So as you will have heard when I described, I only got 2 models out of the per 3 that were with the single-handed, and I wanted single-handed on everything. So I did have to do some conversion work, and the way these models were designed, it did allow me to do that relatively easily, with a little bit of green stuff here, a little bit of posing there, a little bit of filing and clipping there. I think I was quite fortunate that in the design of these models were quite favourable to doing that work. The resin is certainly a lot more brittle than Games Workshop resin, and infinitely more brittle than Games Workshop plastic. So that's something to take into consideration. I think if you were looking at a range of models and you knew you needed to convert them and they were less favourable poses, it could border on the impossible without extensive sculpting work. So yeah, that's another thing to consider. But for me, it was very positive. I was able to get my 9 different miniatures, and with the head swaps and the fact that I had different torsos and legs, I've got 9 different miniatures that they're all very similar, much like any sort of warrior lineup, but they're all individual. And I was really, really happy with that. And for, what was that? How much did we pay? £36 for the 9. Yeah, that's not exactly cheap, but a heck of a lot cheaper and a lot more variation than I would have got with the Games Workshop options. I mean, I can't remember how much their half trolls are, but let's say that somehow I managed to make the 2-handed ones work. I would have been looking at least like sort of £50, I would imagine. So more expensive, and I wouldn't have had their variation. And that's me assuming that they're on the cheaper side, which I don't think they are. But yeah, I wouldn't, it's not cheap as chips, but it's a price that, if I'm just going to say based on the build and how they were to paint, I would say it was worth it. There's definitely some downsides there, and with some different models, maybe I would have felt less positive about it. But on the whole, I was feeling pretty positive. Then when it came to painting, you've got to take your preparation in the same way you do with any resin models of I clean them, which is what I always do with resin models. I know they didn't have a release agent on these because it's not come out of a mold, but I did it just to be sure it was clear. Maybe it's been washed with alcohol, make sure that's all off there so that my primer is going to adhere to it. And then from then on, had no problems with them whatsoever. And yeah, it's not been a year of playing with those models, but I've been using them for quite some time now. I think really, from when I played my first game, we're talking 7 or 8 months with them, and they show no signs of wear whatsoever. I would be quite fearful if I dropped them. I definitely don't think that they would be as robust as a plastic miniature, but I'd also be pretty worried to drop any of my metal miniatures. So, maybe a Games Workshop resin Forge World model, you could drop it from the tabletop and you wouldn't have any damage. I could definitely see that happening. And my half troll might explode and be unusable, but that could very easily happen with a metal model as well. The fact that I can put the metal model back together and paint it wouldn't really make me feel any better of the fact that my half troll was dead. But on carpets and things like that, small drops, they've definitely experienced that, and there's been no problems whatsoever. So yeah, on the whole, there is definitely some considerations there. I think just like there are basically Games Workshop plastic or equivalent is the absolute best. I think we just have to accept that. The fidelity, the design on the modern models, it is the best. But many of the models we have access to in Middle-earth don't have that. And I do have to say, would I buy entire, like for 40k, which is a game I play, or Kill Team, would I buy entire 3D printed models for those systems when there's a whole host of plastic ones I can get and I can convert and I can use them as the base? I would never even consider it. But for Middle-earth strategy battle game, I think it's a fact. I'm now of the opinion that in terms of the models you're receiving and the price, based on my experience, I think it's a really good option. So yeah, that's kind of what my review is on those models. I would recommend them if you're looking for half trolls. They were fun to paint. Contrast paints take really well to them. You can look on my Instagram and see how I've done them. I like to think they came out pretty well. They were part of the army was using when I won Best Army. Yeah, so that's my review on that. Now, that's been fairly positive. One thing I do want to touch on, though, is some bad experiences I've had with 3D models. Well, not models, I guess accessories. And that was, I bought a number of sort of 3D printed parts to add to my models. And it was mainly spears, bows, things like that. And it was a terrible experience, really. I found them incredibly brittle, and I don't know whether I think this is something to take into consideration, is that it probably varies on the person that's printing them, their experience with the printer, and the resin they're using. But the ones I had were just brittle, and every single tournament I've taken those models to that have got the spears on them, I've had a broken spear. And I'm not talking about, I've dropped a horse and it snapped, something you would expect. I'm talking, I've gone to pick up the model, my index finger has lightly brushed the spear and it has just snapped. And the same has been true for other parts. I think the only ones I've seen that haven't broke in sort of circumstances like that have been shields. And maybe in future I'd try with a different 3D printer company, buying those accessories and see, maybe dip my toe with them and see what their spears are like. But for now, what I've done is I've taken off all of the 3D printed accessories, war gear that I've added to my models, and regardless of cost, I think, that's the other thing. They weren't even that cheap, to be honest. I think with the sort of selection I bought, I wound up buying sort of 20 quid's worth, and it wasn't to cover an entire army. It was to sort of edit 12 or so models with bows and spears. So they weren't particularly cheap. So what I've done now is I've found plastic alternatives and been like, okay, yeah, it's only 12 spears for a tenner, but they're plastic. I know they will bend before they break, and I'm going to have to be pretty abusive with them before I do that. So for me, that's sort of my two-sided review there. I've had a really positive and I've had a negative. And, I would be hesitant of buying war gear that's 3D printed if you're looking for tabletop pieces. But I think especially if you're going for someone like Forge Master Minis on Etsy, who I think I'm correct in saying have thousands of reviews, I think those models are more than robust enough for tabletop play. Just as you do with any of your models, try and avoid dropping them on the ground, and you'll probably be all right. So then, to sort of finish off talking about the 3D models and how my attitude has shifted on it, that is sort of the review of the performance of the models. But I know one of the topics I brought up in the past is sort of the efficacy of using models that maybe are copyrighted, and then also the expectation of other players of enjoying the line and turning up and playing against those models. Now, on the efficacy side of things, my opinion hasn't really changed from what it was. I think if you are going to blatantly just copy the designs that Peter Jackson put out in his films, and Games Workshop have a license to, if you're very obviously, a ring wraith on a fell beast of the design of Peter Jackson's films is iconic. I think if you're just going to copy and alter that, it's the same as people doing sort of these Space Marine clones for Warhammer 40k. I think it's wrong. You're just stealing, but doing it on a low scale, so Games Workshop haven't caught up to you yet. And if you ever do it on a big enough scale, they will catch up with you and they will do something about it because you're infringing on IP. I think it's wrong to steal people's work. I think it's wrong to steal things you don't have a right to. However, there is still a lot of realm for people to produce miniatures outside of that. You can't copyright the concept of an orc, for instance. I think everybody on Earth is more than entitled to make orc models. Just don't directly copy something that's from the film of like freeze frame, I'm going to make that guy. Or let's take a screenshot of the Games Workshop website and make that. Everybody's entitled to make orcs. Everybody's entitled to make guys in black cloaks that are on a flying beast. If you keep it generic and you actually use some ingenuity to create your own designs, I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the half trolls I bought, I feel like, it's not even artistic license. So, the concept of a half troll, that's not copyrightable. That's in the public domain, and they've created their own version of a half troll with the added amendum of, imagine maybe they were from North Africa. What they might wear because it's hot there, and they've got limited sewing skills. So on the efficacy, I'm still in the same realm, really. I really don't like when people have, literally used, for instance, I can't remember the designer and I wouldn't call him out either, but when people have done the Dragon Legion and they've done Easterlings and they've just added a few more spikes, and it's like that's quite clearly the same, but you've just added a few extensions to the shields and things like that. So let's move on from is it ethical or not? I think I've drawn my line there. Let's move on to the topic I've said in terms of turning up and the expectation of playing against these models, which I love, and I know many of you do too. And I've said in the past that I am a bit disappointed when I turn up at a tournament and all the models for that army are available and somebody has decided to 3D print the lot and just go with alternative ones. And I don't mean to tar everybody with the same brush, but in my experience, quite frequently, more frequently certainly than people who have just got one or two models, I tend to have to hear a whole story about how little this army has cost them to produce. And I'm sort of sat there with my substantial investment in the official models, and it's just not really a conversation I'm looking to have. Now, do I still feel that exact same way? Yes, I do. However, my attitudes have shifted a bit, especially given Games Workshop's practices this year, I say we put it, and support for the game. Non-existent support, and the rotations haven't been particularly great. And the amount of models that it's hard to get hold of, the amount of models it's possible to source at a reasonable price, the amount of armies that have key pieces missing from them, my sympathy for the 3D printing enthusiast community has grown and grown, and obviously I've dipped a toe into it as well. And I think at this point I am very sympathetic to those who want to run an army where the models are not available from a retailer. I'm very sympathetic to those that, like me, when you found yourself in a position of I want to do this but there's only 1 or 2 poses, I'm sympathetic to that as well. How could I not be? It's something I've done. And I think I've probably come to the conclusion of that, although that is genuinely how I feel, of I would prefer if people didn't run entire 3D printed armies when there is 95% of the range available. Although that is my opinion, I don't think it's really the hill I'm wanting to die on, considering my sympathies. And I think it's something that I personally have decided to let go as an opinion, even if it is my personal preference, because I think with the lack of rotation of models, especially, which is just exacerbating a bad situation, and the lack of new releases, quite frankly, I don't blame people. I can see how, just frustration can boil over. I don't really think that the cost argument really makes all that much sense. If you're going to buy a decent printer and a load of resin for cheap and you're going to print every single model you're ever going to own, I can see how it's cost effective. But you can get so many models, the plastic models, for a decent price on eBay. The ones that are out and are available are readily affordable, but the ones that aren't are incredibly expensive and hard to come by and have limited poses. So yeah, I'm going to let this one go. I would never be calling people out on this podcast and be like, they all had a whole 3D printed army. But maybe I've had a grumble to my mates in the corner of, that was a bit disappointing. I really like those original models. I'm going to let it go. I think I have to cede this ground on this one. With the way things are, I don't blame people. And if support entirely goes, it's what we're all going to be doing. Because eventually the pool of unpainted miniatures or salvageable miniatures on eBay is going to run dry if Games Workshop stops supplying it. And like I say, the moment plastic models become available, or more affordable, or the whole range even, like I'll settle for just bring the whole range back. I think the argument for 3D printed models becomes few and far between, and it's just those individual cases like, there's only one pose, like the Moria Warg Riders, where you've got 3 of the goblins on. I think that is one of the coolest models they've ever released. But I can totally understand if you want to run 5 of them, that you don't just want 5 of the identical model. So yeah, you win. Those of you who had a different opinion on 3D printed miniatures, I have changed my opinion. I'm going to keep my grumbles to a minimum, because I very much do think that it is filling a void which isn't being filled in any way by Games Workshop, and they don't seem to have any intent to fix that. So I'll see your 3D printed models on the table. There's one more topic I want to finish off from 2023, and that is to cap off and conclude our discussion from episode 11, Chaos in Arda-con, which, if you haven't listened to, covered all the controversy from the top table of Arda-con last year, and we sort of concluded it by talking about the wider importance of sportsmanship and fair play. Now, I have thought about this topic a fair amount, and I really did consider doing a follow-up, but that kind of defeats the purpose of why I decided to speak about this particular incident, which was primarily the prominence of it. Here is an incident that appears to be very well witnessed and evidenced, with some of the biggest players at the biggest table at the biggest event, and not a lot appears to have been done about it. it was very symbolic to me, really. It seemed like it represented a lot of the little stories I've heard over the last 2 years, a lot of the little things I've seen myself. And I wanted to use this one big topic of discussion to start a wider discussion. So we aren't going to get bogged down in this any further and do a full episode. But what I am going to do, I will give you 2 updates that I have. And I've also got a bit of a response to some of the things that's been going on. And then I'm going to leave you with that. And I think I've got something which could be a positive way forward for the podcast that we're going to back. Now, the first thing we need to do, I think, is to respond to the feedback I've got. And for speed, I do apologise, but I'm not going to be reading individual messages. But I do really thank you for getting in touch. It has helped to build this whole picture and finish off the story, really. So we did also have the polls out. And I will say that the majority of you have sort of come down with similar conclusions as episode 11. The general gist being, if it feels like cheating, looks like cheating, it's probably cheating. And we did have 2 significant objections, one being that it's just what happens at the top table, and the other that they didn't feel things were conclusive. But they were in the strong minority, and I think it really shows the community's gut attraction to fair play and is representative of what you see at most tables. And it does sound like quite a few of you have had some heated discussions among your own small group. And that's great, really. I've heard of a lot of you refer to the social contract, which I think here at Middle-earth in Mercia, we tend to refer to as a spirit of goodwill or playing to the spirit of the rules. And I think anytime we've had a discussion and a bit of self-reflection about how we as individuals approach the table, I think that's a good thing. And particularly with this, it's sort of an odd situation in that where maybe we needed to consider that we don't just have a responsibility of sportsmanship to the person across from the table from us, but at other tables at the tournament also. So thank you again for everybody that got involved in that. And the first of my 2 updates is that, to my understanding, both from a Facebook post by James Clark, who is the head organiser of Arda-con, and some other sources, that they intend to implement something that makes it impossible to draw the final round prior to the championship round. I've also been told that this has the backing of the GBHL. Now, I don't know if this is set in stone. I don't know if it applies to every table, the top 5, or just one. And a hard commitment has not been given. But I think if they do go ahead with this, it's a big win for Arda-con, really. A big win for international players worried this might occur again, and for everyone who's a fan who attends. I think this also gives a bit of closure to those who were unhappy if it goes ahead, because it shows that the organisers never considered it would happen or intended for it to happen. I will say, though, it does kind of raise the question of why wasn't more done on the day if this wasn't their intention, but there we go. Now, my next update is sort of a state of affairs. As part of my investigations, I have spoken to people who were at the event, people who were directly involved. I think I'm actually the only podcast or YouTube channel to speak to these people, and have been able to officially confirm what was done and what wasn't done. Now, official complaints were submitted to the GBHL by at least 3 people. Now, this really is significant, and I'll tell you why. As this would trigger the GBHL's official complaints procedure, which you can read in full on their website, and I am going to be abbreviating, but the gist of it is the league secretary should investigate, which, and again this is stated on their website, should involve speaking to players, the TO, witnesses, and then either dismiss or escalate to the management committee. I am aware that the management committee made the end decision. That decision was that both players would be issued with a warning and a note placed on their player record. Now, there were a few reasons given why there was no further action, but the one I feel is most pertinent and significant was that there was no hard evidence of cheating or collusion, which they stated they felt should have been possible. And I think it's this one that is problematic, because I have spoken to people that were there, people who made the complaints, and do you know how many of them I found that have been interviewed? None. It doesn't appear from what I've been able to find that any effort was made to cross-reference statements, which very much is considered concrete evidence in courts across the world. It sounds like a lot of people felt they saw something. It sounds like a lot of people thought they heard incriminating conversations. It really does make you think, why wasn't that looked into? And what do they actually consider to be solid evidence to take action? Do we have to wear dash cams? Do we have to have video footage for an actual action to be taken? And I actually think the league's complaints procedure, as written on their website, is really good. But this doesn't feel like it's been followed, and all I can really say is I think it's really disappointing. Now, I've had quite a few of you get in contact and point out that following the release of our episode, quite a lot of publications did their own episodes in the following weeks and months, or had Jake Rawson on to discuss the controversy. And I sort of feel I need to say something, as I've seen Jake interviewed on at least 4 occasions where he had the opportunity to present his unmitigated point of view. And in these, not a single one has strongly presented the opposing view. No one has raised that both players were issued an informal warning by the GBHL. No one has spoken to the people who made the complaints, let alone invited them on for an interview. One narrative has been presented over and over again, without challenge. And although our discussion here will no doubt have been flawed, I did my best to present both sides. I think it sends a very bad message to consistently allow only one side of a complaint a platform. And I do have to point out, as much as I am a fan and a former Patreon, and it might bring me some flack, one of the interviews was even done by a member of the management committee. The warning wasn't mentioned, and I don't think that's a good look for the GBHL if they want to appear impartial. It feels a bit like marking your own homework in public. How is that meant to inspire confidence in those who have concerns to do so? And on that note, there has been one consistent trail of chat that I feel has been totally unacceptable, and that is the way the people who made the complaints have been presented as jealous, petty players with an axe to grind and with no right to their view. That's been done in a number of ways from what I've seen, from not challenging comments, through to making jokes about the incident, through to just outright saying it. I've seen actions which are not theirs associated with them. I've even outrageously seen one person bring their nationality into it as a reason to dismiss them, as if that is of any relevance whatsoever. And I could go on about this, but I'll say this to you, my listeners. Regardless of what you feel about the controversy, do we want to be a community that disparages those who use official channels to raise concerns? There we go. Now, I've recently watched a video with Stephen Box talking about his approach to sportsmanship, and if you don't know, he's the founder of Vanguard Tactics, which is sort of like a training house for 40k players. So I'm not really interested in that or talking about that, but I was quite impressed with what he had to say about how he approaches the game, because as we all know, 40k has not had the best reputation in the past few years. And I do think he genuinely tries to practice what I would call extreme sportsmanship, and it's admirable. I've linked the episode in the podcast description if you want to check it out, and I do encourage you to do so. It's got sort of bookmarks on it, and you can get to the sections that are relevant through that. The part that I thought was really interesting to us, though, was he states how he keeps a habit of non-blame reporting to the TOs. So, like, for instance, if a player is playing a rule wrong, he politely corrects the player, and then at the end of the round, he lets the TO know without blame, just goes up to them and says, hey, this player I was playing accidentally made this mistake. I thought I should just let you know for your notes. And if that's a mistake and they correct it, that's the end of it, as it won't be mentioned again. But if they do make that, quotation marks, mistake again, maybe it gets picked up that the mistake was not a mistake. Maybe that player is playing for advantage. And then if it happens in a third game, there's no smoke without fire. And this ties into the GBHL's established procedure, really. They keep player records for complaints. They have a carding procedure for repeat offenders. And it kind of got me thinking, could we as players report no fault to TOs? And they sort of submit a report to the GBHL as part of their results. If we all did this, we would pretty rapidly see if that top player really does overplay the rules for VP. Or is it just a rumour? Or if that difficult player we're all chatting about was really just having a bad day and they should be cut a break. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I think it's something that I'm going to be talking about. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's a step too far? Do you think it's too hostile? Or maybe if you're the kind of player people want to play against, could it just be a tool to keep the game honest? So yeah, let me know what you think. Our email address, as ever, is middleearthinmercia@gmail.com, or you can message me on our Facebook page or over on Instagram at Lord of Hykra. But yeah, that's all I have on this. Now, there's not really a lot left to say. I think we have covered everything that was sort of a loose end or needed to be reviewed from 2023. All I would really say is if you do have any comments about the 3D printing discussion, whether you're disappointed that I've caved from my hill that I was on, or you're happy to see somebody that was a 3D printer cynic, at least maybe I've not totally converted, but ease up on their position, then please do drop us a line either on Facebook, or you can email us at middleearthinmercia@gmail.com. If you do have any comments on the fair play discussion, like I say, we are going to leave that specific incident where it is now. I think we've put enough time into it. But if you want to talk about your experiences or maybe your opinions on some of the ideas that were shared by Stephen in his YouTube video or anything along those sort of lines, like, do you think maybe it would create a hostile environment if people went too far that way? Is that something that concerns you? Would you prefer to maybe tolerate the occasional indiscretion to sort of avoid a situation where people are self-reporting? So for me personally, I think there probably is somewhere in the middle of the balance that maybe these sort of things are necessary at your 90s and 100s. But yeah, I'd sort of be inclined to agree that it would be disappointing to see them maybe at a GBHL 80 being necessary. But I think that's an interesting topic. In the meantime, I'm going to go away. I'm going to sort of have a bit of a think about what army I want to do for 2023. I think that's something that's really sort of going around in my mind, and sort of what objectives and pencil in what tournaments am I looking to attend this year. I'm sure it's much the same for many of you out there. But yeah, I think this has been a nice way to sort of cap off some of those stray lines we had from 2023. But I think though the 3D printing and the fair play discussion, I think those are two things that are incredibly relevant to our community. So maybe they will come up more than once in the future. We will have to see. But until then, I hope you find time for some hobby. And I hope that you've got an eye on some weekends that you can fill with tournaments. I'm looking forward to seeing more of you at tournaments across the table from me, if the trend continues, beating me at least 50% of the time. In the future, me and Ash might have to look at getting some more dice made so that we can give them out to people we play. Or maybe, because we did go through them pretty rapidly, maybe in future it'll be sort of a thing that you have to say to us, I've listened to the podcast and give me one of them dice, and that's how you get one. Maybe that would be a fun way to do it. But until then, use your time wisely. Hope to speak to you soon. Hope to see you soon. Have a good one, guys. Cheers.